Hi, we're Erin, Sarah, and Emma, and today we're going to talk to you about differentiated instruction. We wish to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land on which we meet today, the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nations. We'll begin our presentation with an introduction exploring the what and the why of differentiated instruction before diving deeper into the principles of this pedagogical approach and looking at how it supports the strengths and needs of all students. Next, Sarah will share a review of literature and recent research, illustrating and evaluating the efficacy of this approach. Erin will then explore differentiated instruction through the lens of the local classroom with a day of differentiated instruction. Then we'll wrap up with some top tips and takeaways for you to employ in your classrooms. I'm sure you've heard the quote, if you judge a fish on its ability to climb its tree, it will live its whole life believing it is stupid. It's a much used quote, but an exceedingly relevant one when discussing education, inclusion, and differentiation. As teachers in this wonderfully evolving educational landscape, inclusive education is not a buzzword, rather it's embedded into our everyday. I don't have to tell you that every learner is different, you know this, just as you are different from me with unique interests, knowledge and skills, and different strengths. So too are our little learners, and in our practice we look for ways to best support them. We adjust, we modify, and we refine our teaching. We are masters of flexibility, differentiating daily. We do this both deliberately and intuitively. And while we've all had our fair share of those wonderful aha, eureka moments, there will have been times when you've adapted a lesson on the fly because 17 of your 23 students are looking at you like you've just tried to teach them quantum mechanics in French while riding a unicycle. Since the Australian government's signing of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2008, and with the subsequent formation of policy and legislation within Australia, inclusive education has received increased attention and momentum. Documents such as the Alice Springs Declaration call for equity and excellence in Australian schooling. We see differentiation embedded across a number of teacher standards, both explicitly and implicitly. As teachers, we are legally and ethically obligated to create inclusive learning environments that support all learners. Differentiating might feel like a daunting task when you've got the national average of 23 students in your classroom, each with differing strengths and needs, interests and backgrounds, some requiring extension or greater support and scaffolding. So how can we tailor our teaching and learning experiences to best support each and every student? How do we differentiate instruction? As Carol Ann Tomlinson says, the most important step that we can take with differentiated instruction is to start. What matters is that we start, not where we start. Differentiated instruction is a flexible and inclusive approach to education. It considers the abilities, interests, and preferences of each student. It is highly student-centered, as we teachers consider how we can extend the skills and knowledge of each student and provide meaningful learning experiences, regardless of their starting point. It's not reinventing the real wheel, rather it's a way of thinking and teaching with the student in mind and creating classroom environments that actively encourage learning. Tomlinson suggests when considering the students within our classroom, we often think of our class as if it were just one student. We speak of them as the students or the class. For example, the class really engaged with that lesson, or the students didn't grasp the content, when it's incredibly rare a particular learning experience works equally well for the entire class. Differentiation asks us to disaggregate the collective of students and instead view them as individuals. It celebrates and normalizes diversity. It asks us to know our students, to understand their strengths, their learning preferences, and their interests, and to consider their unique needs so that we can recognize and remove any barriers and create an equitable learning environment for all, maximizing the success of every student. Let's take a quick look at some of the key guiding principles for differentiated instruction before we explore the how. It goes without saying, but providing a positive and supportive learning environment for all learners is paramount, as is a quality curriculum with challenging yet realistic goals and high expectations for all. Assessment of and for learning is used to both inform and shape instruction. Teaching and learning experiences are responsive and flexible as we adapt our practice based on student feedback and assessment to ensure the best outcomes for each learner. And imperative to the success of this approach, we know each student. So how do we differentiate instruction? We can differentiate the content, the process, the product, and the learning environment as we respond to students' readiness, their interests, their learning profile. And in doing so, we maximize the success of every student. Erin will be exploring the how to differentiate instruction further with examples as she shares with us a day of differentiation in a typical Aussie classroom. But before doing so, let's dive deeper into the evidence base and look at the research with Sarah.
Whilst differentiation is not a new idea, recent research clearly identifies a variety of benefits for student learning environments and achievement. PRAST conducted extensive research examining the impact of teacher education in differentiated instruction. Working with all teachers of 30 primary schools, the authors focused their professional development on the cycle of differentiated instruction. Professional development took place continuously throughout the year and implemented active leadership roles within schools and required principal involvement. Teacher participant survey responses indicated daily use of the newly acquired knowledge and skills and highlighted teachers' perception of positive influences on student learning and motivation. This feedback is consistent with findings which showcased significant student achievement growth. Importantly, this growth was perceived equally amongst lower average and high ability students. Similarly, Guay et al. Investigated the impact of differentiated instruction on student motivation. More specifically, research explored the structures of educators' pedagogical approaches. Student and teacher participant survey findings clearly demonstrated regular use of differentiated instruction had a strong influence upon students' self-perceived competence. This self-perceived competence had a direct positive influence on students' intrinsic motivation, evidencing the differentiated instruction provided optimal challenge for each individual student. Notably, this study emphasised the importance of frequency of implementation of differentiated instruction, demonstrating that these positive shifts in student confidence and motivation did not significantly occur when the approach was irregular. More recently, Goddard explored the efficacy of school-wide differentiated instruction on student achievement. Analysis of teacher surveys, achievement data, and standardised testing data from 95 low socioeconomic schools determined differentiated instruction positively increased both mathematics and reading achievement levels. Goddard highlighted the impact of school leadership support in fostering a culture of effective pedagogy, importantly noting this shared expectation promoted student success despite school demography. A further study by Valiendes aimed to establish the efficacy of differentiated instruction with mixed ability classrooms. Research investigated 24 Year 4 classrooms over 13 different schools. Teachers participated in systematic, focused, and continuous training and support. Results indicated a significant increase in student academic progress in direct comparison to those who did not participate. Importantly, Valiendes' research highlights that differentiated instruction promotes equity, optimization of quality, and effectiveness in teaching. This evidence sits amongst a plethora of studies which clearly identify differentiated instruction as an effective pedagogical approach. The dominating teaching and learning benefits promoted through this approach include learner self-perceived competence, engagement, intrinsic motivation, and importantly, the equal opportunity for learning success amongst all students. A student's self-perception of their ability to learn plays a crucial role in the classroom. Having an incremental view of ability not only highly influences a student's social, emotional well-being, but also deeply impacts their motivation for learning. Student motivation is the driving energy of learning that influences behavioural choices, from how much time and effort a student is willing to apply to tasks to setting and reaching learning goals. Specifically, intrinsic motivation embraces the activity and subsequent learning in itself as the reward. Importantly, a student's motivational state is directly related to their ability to engage with their learning, and an engaged student is essential for a meaningful, effective learning. And finally, learning equity, the ultimate goal in contemporary Australian classrooms, where all students are valued and have equal opportunity to participate in and fulfil their learning potential. This sense of belonging is undeniably powerful.
So now that we've looked at what differentiation is and the supporting literature, we will now explore the how. So this is just a broad screenshot of the school context that we will be focusing on in this presentation. So Sunshine Village Primary School is a local government school located in a low to medium socioeconomic suburb in southeast Victoria. As you can see, this school has an ICSEA percentile of 22%. And so this percentile is a scale which identifies the socio-educational advantage of a school. The calculation of this index is based upon students' family backgrounds, so things like parents' occupation, school education, and non-school education, as well as the Indigenous status of students and the geographic location of the school. So the higher this value, the higher the socio-educational advantage of the school and vice versa. So as you can see, with the percentile score of 22%, Sunshine Village Primary is more educationally disadvantaged than 78% of all Australian schools. So the why, we chose to focus on this particular primary school context as it represents a broad screenshot of the diversity of learners within most Australian classrooms. Again, as Goddard supports, no matter the socio-educational level of the school, this example shows that differentiated instruction and learning can be implemented into every classroom setting. So just because this school does have a very low ICSEA percentile, we will demonstrate in the following slides how differentiation can be implemented effectively into every classroom setting. And if we just quickly look at the right of the screen, you can see that there is a brief insight into a specific middle years class, which we have chosen to focus on for this presentation. So what we're about to do now is just briefly run through what a day in a differentiated primary classroom may look like. We've decided to talk you through a series of lessons throughout the day to demonstrate how differentiation can be applied to all curriculum areas, such as reading and art, rather than just strictly literacy and maths. So the day begins with a morning session of independent silent reading and student-teacher reading conferences. During this session, the teacher records the students' reading progressions and talks through personal goals with the student during each reading conference. This is also the time the teacher takes the opportunity to check in with students personally and discuss their interests towards the books they are reading, to tailor these interests into other areas of their learning. In short, this introduction to the school day is influenced by reader readiness, learner profiles, and individual interests. Students are provided with various reading stimulus, such as magazines and toy catalogues, to accommodate and suit the prior knowledge of every child. And so for the next session of the morning, it's a literacy lesson. And during this lesson, students will read the wordless picture book, I Walk with Vanessa. So this is a picture book that all students are able to relate to, as it discusses the experiences and emotions felt on the first day of a new school. It's important to incorporate storybooks that all students have some connection to in the classroom. So for example, presenting a Santa Claus book to a class of students with some who don't celebrate Christmas. This would cause inequity within the classroom and a sense of exclusion for those particular children. So students are provided with a photocopied or digital version of the wordless text with the addition of speech and thought bubbles to add their thoughts on what the characters may be thinking and feeling. Students are encouraged to consider the points of view from the characters other than Vanessa. So the main points to note within this task are that all students are working on the same activity. Students are encouraged to work at their own pace and abilities, and there's the option to complete the task using Microsoft Word, as some students prefer to work on laptops as opposed to writing. So we are now progressing through to the midday session, which is maths. And so as you can see at this maths lesson, the students are all working on the same curriculum content. They are just provided with different processes of achieving the end product, and their end product may look slightly differently depending on their strengths and abilities. So just to quickly recap, throughout each of these lessons, the class as a whole are presented with the same content. It's just the process of understanding the content and the differentiated final product that vary to meet the needs of all learners. So when differentiating in the classroom, it's important to present the same content to each student, as this highlights an inclusive classroom environment. And now we've reached the final lesson of the day, which is an afternoon session of art. So students have been presented with many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander artworks and the significant meanings behind what they represent in relation to Dreamtime stories and symbolic communications. Students are encouraged to create an art piece that represents themselves as an individual being, a piece of work that displays the students' interests, beliefs, likes, and values. The students will be provided with drawing materials such as pencils, crayons, painting materials, craft, clay, that they have the opportunity to utilise in the creation of their work. Students will then be encouraged to explain their artworks to the class, answering a series of prompting questions about the design choices and meanings in their work, either orally or in writing. So as you can see, again, all of the students are provided with the same curriculum contexts. It's just the process of how the learner may achieve this product and the actual end product that may differ in accordance to every learner's individual capabilities.
So in summary, differentiated instruction is a student-centered approach. It is a way of thinking about teaching with the student in mind. It's about creating classroom environments that are actively encouraging learning, as we acknowledge that each of our little learners in our classrooms is capable of remarkable things. While there is much to summarise, instead of just waffling on further, click on the link below in the description box to access our info sheet on differentiated instruction. It features top tips and takeaways, as well as some differentiation strategies you might like to employ in your classrooms. Thank you so much for joining us, and happy differentiating.